Okay, hello and welcome to the liquid transformation tutorial. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make an animation like the one from the intro. And before I start, I will let you know that there's a complete detailed learning video about force fields on the Flip Fluids channel on YouTube, so this one will only be about the way how to prepare and animate objects. And I will give you a very short overview to the force field settings we are using. Yes, okay, so this is the scene you have seen, and this will be a downloadable blend file preset for all Flip Fluid add-on customers, so you have a good starting point for our or for your animation. I will not remake exact the same animation like in the intro, but include also some other geometry. Okay? Alright, so let's start. A good idea is to use a rotating object and parent our animation objects to it. This way we only need to animate the object's rotation while being able to change the transformation of our objects that are parented. Yeah. So we could use an empty for this job. Let's add this one here. Empty. Empty. And place it in the middle, of course. And place it somewhere here. Inside the fluid. Here's some fluid. Yes, so inside here is a good idea. And yeah, so with this empty here, I would say before we animate or rotate this thing, we need to find out what force field settings will work in our scene and how long the fluid needs to become the shape of our objects. So our first object could be the number 4. Let's add one. We need a text object. Need to rotate the text object here and type in a 4. I'm not going to change the font and make it some bigger and place it somewhere here. Make sure you're not touching the fluid and make sure you're not too far away from the fluid object, because our force field object needs to be near here the fluid. You could also do it inside, but we would like to have it looking like the intro as near as possible. Yeah, so let's place it here. It's somewhere in the middle. And so we have now just a text object. This is flat. We do not have anything like a volume or something else. So we need to convert the 4 into a mesh. You can press F3 and then type in mesh or type in convert. Then you can convert it. In edit mode, you will see how it is looking like. So this looks not beautiful to me. So what we need to do is we need to add a solidify modifier to have some thickness here and make it big enough. We need volume for our animation. Yes. Order to 5 looks fine to me. And to have a more beautiful form, let's apply this one. Let's do another thing. Let's take the remesh modifier, sharp, scale to 1, disable, remove, disconnected. And as you can see, this is not beautiful yet. But what we can do is, let's have a look. This detail is not okay. So let me increase the octave depth here to 5. Yes. And now let me apply this modifier as well. And now we have a very beautiful 4. Yeah, that is good. That looks good. And I think our add-on will work with this. So applying the modifiers is not required. I'm just doing it to show you how this is working. Okay, so yes, now I will give you a quick overview to available force field types and their settings. So while the 4 is selected, you can click the force button here and then go to the physics properties panel. Yeah, so, and on the right side you will find the mode drop-down field where you will find some different modes. So you could use a point force field, a surface force field, a volume force and the curve guide force field. And maybe you know while watching these little icons what they are for. So curve guide is of course to follow a curve, while a point only works with a single point. Oh yeah, you can see the tooltips here. The surface, using the surface would mean that the water climbs along our surfaces of the 4, and of course we need the volume force field. This is the one that will work for us. And without making any changes, save your file and then hit bake and take a look to what this is looking like. Yeah, so it's not required to simulate all frames because this is not doing what we were looking like. And this is because we need to adjust the force field settings. Sometimes it will be hard to find the right settings, but don't stop to try different things. So what you can do is you can enable debugging for force fields. So you can find this, let's hit stop here. And yeah, while the domain is selected, scroll down on the right side. And there's that force field debugging field. Force field debugging, and yeah, enable this one. Make sure it is visible. Then hit reset. Yeah, and then hit bake. Okay. This will visualize the way gravity behaves depending on your settings. All that arrows are representing our gravity, and yes, they are pointing our number, what means the force field is working in general, but overall the gravity lines need to shape our number more intensive. Yeah, without going too deep into the meaning of all the settings, let me adjust them and tell you a few things about. So I hit stop here and I hit reset here. And while the 4 is selected, let's take a look here. So strength defines how strong our force field works. What will be shown as red lines in the visualization. Let's change this to, let's say, -13. Yes. Fall off power defines how quickly the strength will decrease with distance. So I will use the number 2. This is the value to go, and with the minimum and maximum distance setting, we can set the area in which our force field are working. So let's try something like, enable this 0.05 and enable this one and 0.4. Yeah. The maximum force limit factor will untouched in this video. So then there's a gravity scale. Yeah, the gravity scale defines how strong gravity will be inside our object, and with width, how far this effect will reach out. So we will use 0 gravity and 1 width. Yeah, then there's export animated mesh. So exporting the animated object is important as we are going to parent our object to another moving object. And if this is not enabled, force fields will work, but ignore the movement. And you can also enable skip re-export, because once this has been exported, it is not required to re-export it the next time we are baking for some change settings as example. However, if you are going to change the way the 4 is moving, you need to click force re-export on the next bake to override the previous exported mesh. Okay, so with these changes here, let's hit bake again. Yes, and you can see our settings are defining the shape of our number 4 much more compared to the previous settings. Exactly what we need. That means we can now go on with the animation part. Let's continue baking till the fluid rests in the final shape. So I think we could also disable the force fields debugging lines here, because we see what we need. Okay, I think this will be enough, so let's hit stop. Because now we know how long it takes till the shape of our number is visible. I would say at frame 100, what is a good value to work with. This is great, so it's time to animate some rotations. Keep in your mind frame 100, so we will wait 100 frames till the first rotation starts. But I will reset this now, and yeah, let's take a look to this thing here. This is our rotation empty, and as I said, we are on frame 100, so we can set a keyframe here for rotation to make clear till 100, till frame 100, nothing is rotating here. And then we should think about how long a rotation will take. I will always make 180 degrees rotations, and I think something around 25 seconds. What is frames? What is 1 second? In my scene, because I'm using 25 frames per second. So I think let's go to frame 25 and make a rotation along the z-axis and 180 degrees, and then hit rotation, and now we have that rotation here. Looks great. So 100 frames long, nothing is happening, and then we have a rotation around 180 degrees. I would say we need another 100 frames for the next object, and then again, yes, a rotation. Okay, so something we can do now here in the graph editor is we can add a modifier to repeat these steps here endless. So we will have a rotation endless. That's exact the thing we need. So while this is selected, make sure the other rotation keyframes are deselected or not visible. You can also lock them, but it's not required. Make sure this is selected, mark all points, and on the right side you will find modifiers here. So the F-curves and here are modifiers, and we will need a cycles modifier to repeat this motion. But there will be something to be changed before. Let me show you. If you have cycles here, we have these lines, and what we also need to do is we need to change this to repeat with offset, but the thing is, we now have a straight line. A straight line means we have an endless rotation here without any pause between. There are no breaks. So let's delete the modifier now. What we need to do is we just need to add a keyframe to our first frame in the scene. So also where no rotation happens. Press I, rotation, and now we have a keyframe here. And now we can select all keyframes again and again, add the cycles modifier, what now looks different than before. And now let's change this again to repeat with offset and repeat with offset. Now you can see we have yes, 100 frames, nothing, rotation, and another 100 frames, nothing, and again at 25 frames, rotation, and again nothing, and so on and so on. This will never stop. So this is very cool. So we only need to parent our object now. So hit the 4, select the 4, and select our empty, press Ctrl P, object. Now the 4 will rotate with our empty. Make sure this thing is in the middle, to the top view. Let's move the 4 more to the middle, so our rotation is really around the center axis. That looks beautiful. And at frame 100, with the rotation, we need to change the shape to something like Suzanne. So let's add Suzanne. Monkey. Make it as big as the 4, somewhere around this. Yeah, make sure it's not touching the fluid object. Yes, so that looks beautiful to me. And what we also need to do is we need to make sure that it is manifold. If there's non-manifold data, this will not work in the simulator, but we found out a way to check this. Let's move this to the middle, I'm sorry, make it some smaller. So there is a 3D print add-on that comes with Blender. You just need to enable it in the preferences menu. And with this one, you can click check all, and then you will find non-manifold edge. Yes, and this is something we do not like. But what we can do in this add-on is we just click on make manifold, and then when we click check all, it's great. So now this thing will work in the add-on. Great. So yeah, let's make this a force field, of course. Force field, and we could copy all the settings from the 4 to the monkey. To be able to switch between the monkey and the 4 in an easier way, you can hit the organize button here. And now you will find the Suzanne and the text in the force fields collection. Okay, so let's take a look to the 4. -13. And let's bring it into this here too. Let's repeat this with all the other settings. Okay, I think that looks beautiful. And what we need now to do is we need to find the correct rotation start. So I think with frame 100, this thing should rotate and facing to us at frame 125. So at 125, I'm going to parent the monkey to our rotation empty object. And then you will see it's rotating very well. Make also sure that export animated mesh is enabled and that skip re-export is enabled as well. Very great. Another thing that now should happen is we need to set keyframes for enabled here, because otherwise the force field of the monkey and of the 4 is working together. That is something we do not want. So at 100, before the rotation happens, we are going to set one keyframe for enabled, because till then the force field of the 4 is enabled, and one frame later, at 101, we are going to disable this one. Let's jump back to 100 and select the monkey. This thing should be not enabled till here, so disable it, set a keyframe, and should be enabled at frame 101. So these two objects are switching between. Okay, so the monkey now has 100 frames till the fluid will fill up the volume, and then it would be time to add another object. So this will happen at frame 225, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another object here, something like, let's do it again with a text. Let's type in F like fluid. Make it big enough. Like this. You can make all the other objects invisible, so it's easier to work with this text now. As before, convert this one to a mesh. Add a solidify to it. Make it with the same volume like before. Place it somewhere in the middle. Like this. Okay, and we could also add remesh modifier, sharp, scale 1, disable remove disconnected checkbox, and take a look if this is looking beautiful. If yes, nothing else is required to change. We do not need to apply this, as I told you. This was just to show you what is happening, so leave the things as they are. But what we now need to do is we need to think about where this thing will rotate and when it is, facing into the right direction. So let me disable Suzanne for this example. Suzanne will make its rotation from this frame to this frame. So at this frame the F needs to be faced like this here. So while it is selected, also select our rotation object and parent this one, and you will see it's rotating correctly. So of course, again, we now need to copy all the settings to the F, because they're working good for the 4 and for the monkey. So as you can see, automatically this text will be placed in the force collection, so it's easy to jump between these different objects here. Okay, so F is selected. We need to make this a force field, of course. We need to make this a volume force field. Don't forget this, otherwise you will have some errors, and type in all the values from the other objects here too. Okay, and of course think about where we have to enable or disable this checkbox here. So I think before rotating, what is at frame 225, till there it is required that this is disabled here, and at the next frame it should be enabled. Let's go to the monkey, where it should be enabled till this frame, so set a keyframe here, and disabled at this time. Okay, so now has been set up for our simulation. I will make a quick bake with a low resolution, so we can take a look to how our animation will work now. Okay, great, so let's stop here and take a look if things are working. So let me disable this from being visible. Yes, and I think that is looking beautiful. At the monkey. And then in the next step there will be a rotation, then it becomes the F. It also works fantastic. So one thing here is we can increase the resolution settings, so this will look much more beautiful. And if you're not happy with the result of your force field, always remember you can use debugging. Okay, so but in general that is looking great for me, and I think this will work with a higher resolution perfectly. So we can now reset the cache, or if you want you can add a new cache using this sign here, but I'm not going to do this. Let me hit reset again. Yeah, so now as we have finished with setting up our simulation, we should increase the resolution to something around 200. And before we start with baking, we should think about the shader for our fluid. In my example, I was using a shader that shows a different color in faster motion. And that is possible using attributes. And attributes need to be enabled before baking. So, yeah, let's take a look to where attributes are. On the right side, you will find, yes, it's inside surface mesh, because attributes are working on the surface, not on the volume or something else. It's a surface effect, and you need to make sure that the speed attribute is enabled. Yeah. So if you cannot see any attributes here, you have to take a look into your preferences. And let's have a look to add-ons. And you will find the developers tools here. So when this is disabled, you will see that the attributes are disappearing. So it's required to have this enabled, otherwise it's not possible to work with this. Alright, okay, so the speed attribute is the one we will use for our flip fluid shader. And the velocity attribute is used to generate motion blur. Motion blur will be at using a special geometry node setup, but you don't need to set up it yourself. You just need to click the initialize motion blur button. So this one is here. Initialize motion blur. So once you have clicked it, velocity attributes automatically will be enabled. And one hint here is if you are using the velocity attribute together with obstacles, I would recommend to enable this generate against obstacles checkbox here, because otherwise you might have some artifacts in rendering motion blur. Okay, just as a hint, so it will cost some simulation time. Baking will take a longer while, but it's a good thing to have this enabled. Once this is done, then you will find a modifier on your simulation surface, and it's this motion blur surface modifier. And yeah, you can change the strength of your motion blur scale, and you should know this is something that is only visible in rendering, so it's not visible in the viewport shading. In the blend file you can download, it's there's also a prepared shader node. Have a look inside here. This is what you will find there. And it's important to know that attributes will only be visible in your final mesh. If you are working with a preview mesh, attributes will not take any effect. And motion blur is, as I said, only visible in a final rendering. Let's have a deeper look into the node setup here. We are having an attribute node that is calling the flip speed attribute. This is the speed one we set up here, and we are going to use this together with a map range and a color ramp to control a mix shader. And the mix shader is something that mixes two different shaders, like our fader material and a simple water material, depending on speed. This way it works. And when everything has been set up, make sure your final resolution has been set up. Let's go with 200 as example. Then we could also set an output path. So let's have a look to output. Save this, accept. And now we can prepare a really cool magic automatic execution. Here in the command line tools you can enable render after bake, and then you can choose between normal and batch. So select batch. What this does is the following. Click launch bake, and command line baking will be started. And if there are any issues while baking, our add-on automatically will try to restart baking as often as you typed in the add-on's preferences. I can show you. Here are our preferences, add-ons flip fluid, and there is here command line tools, relaunch bake after crash. So it will try 5 times to relaunch baking if there is any error. And when baking has been finished, our add-on automatically generates the render batch file. So while generating it, it takes a look into your output folder for already rendered frames and skips them. On the other hand, when rendering has been finished and you are missing random frames, you can click the generate batch file yourself, and the add-on will take a look for missing frames to generate a matching render batch file. Unfortunately, the complete automatic only works on Windows computers actually, so if you have one, click the Lunch Bake button and drink some coffee. So while baking is in progress, what you cannot see here, because the add-on is doing it using command line tools, but you still can load baked frames. And while being inside here, let me show you how the shader is working, so you can enable the rendered preview button here, and then you can take a look to how beautiful this is looking like. So as I told you, if you switch to the preview mesh, this will not work. Nothing is visible here. So on the final mesh this will work, and you can make some adjustments here and see the changes in real time. Something to play around. Another thing is you will not see any motion blur here actually, because you need to render a frame. So I can render an image now for you, and then you will see the motion is blurred. With having all this said, this is the end of the Creative Liquid Transformation tutorial. I highly recommend to take a look to the Complete Guide Learning Series on the FlipFluids YouTube channel, because it will help you to understand all the settings we just made. Yeah, so thank you very much for watching this tutorial. Let me see your animations. Goodbye.